the same style of doubling down is something that happens on a global scale. So it's not a personal failing that you do it, but there is a strategy that you can use, which is, and it sounds like the most absurdly simple thing, but you basically just say, hey, help me understand where you're coming from with this, and not skip ahead to all of the assumptions that you have about where they may be coming from, but actually listen to their words.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's the approach that I've been thinking about as I've been thinking, you know, if I do go back to Ohio and see family members, I'm not going to sort of take on the whole, why do you support Trump or something, but, just sitting down on some topic, I understand that you care about guns. I just want to understand why. Can you talk to me about why you like guns, what you like about them, how you use them? That maybe we could come to, of course you're not going to immediately agree on everything, but I think that piece of understanding is really important and not done a whole lot right now.
I think what Kate said too, this is Emily. I think what Kate said is also really profound in that you don't have to come away agreeing with the person, but there is something to be said about understanding their perspective. I don't know, this may be me being naive or being kind of like a hopeless optimist, but I generally like to assume the good in people. I like to assume that, you know, the people that are in charge of big decisions in this country, people that vote the way that they do so out of some sort of belief that they're doing the right thing. I generally, I don't like to sit and believe that people want to own guns for malicious reasons, but genuinely because they believe it's the right thing for them. And when that's an idea that feels so foreign to me, I want to understand, why do you feel like this is the best choice for you? Or why do you feel like this is the best choice for your family? Because I want to believe you're coming from a good place.
hmm Yeah, I think one place where I've seen some good conversations recently on social media with a lot of nuance around them is this thing about Al Franken and sort of,
Hmm.
how do we as Democrats respond to that? And yes, the people who are having these conversations are all starting from sort of a same basic place. This isn't people with wildly different views about things, but they are starting these conversations with a different idea sometimes about how Democrats should be reacting to these allegations. And,
Hmm.
and I've seen some really good discussions with people bringing up really interesting points and talking to each other as real people, not sort of shouting and feeling like, no, I have to get the last word in, but people saying things on Facebook like, wow, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Mhm.
It's I yes, these are largely people who agree on some basics and we're coming to this question as a question, not I've got it all figured out, but instead I'm struggling with this. Here's where I'm leaning. What do other people think? But it's been interesting to see actual conversations going on. I mean, I will say one time that I will engage in actual arguments on Facebook, not so much on Twitter because there's just no point with so few characters to deal with. But on Facebook, I will, even if I know I won't change the mind of the person I'm arguing with, if I feel like it's important for the other people in the argument who agree with me to see that they're not alone.
Yes.
So, for instance, I have a cousin who agrees with me on a lot of issues, but she has a friend who regularly picks fights with her on Facebook about political things, would say terrible things about Hillary Clinton. And I will sort of rush in and defend her point of view. I know I'm never going to change this guy's mind. I fully accept that. I'm not trying to. I am just trying to reassure my cousin that she is not alone in her views, that other people, reasonable people who've thought about these issues a lot, do. And I feel like that's really important and something that liberals used to have a lot of trouble with and ended up sort of being quiet. And just sort of backing away and feeling like they were alone and everyone else had this other opinion.
say
Well,
the same thing, actually. Only less. It's more to. I assume that there are people who are reading whatever thread I'm commenting on who like haven't said anything, but are, if not like unsure about their position, are perhaps in some way open to learning more. And so I'm sort of more writing for them in those cases. But
Yeah.
I do agree with you. There's a lot of times when I engage with people, and I know I'm not going to change their minds. I'm out to reach other people.
Do we think that works? I do it. I've never seen any actual evidence. I've seen evidence, maybe not that I've changed anyone's mind, but that at least the people who I'm rushing in to defend appreciate it. So that's something, I suppose.
I feel like the Reddit Change My Mind group is actually that very idea, right? Because you don't have to be the one who's asked the question in order to read and see some supporting arguments for a different position. And so maybe this, in addition to if folks are disenfranchised or being hurt by what that other position is, in addition to supporting those folks, maybe people are actually able to take it in more because they don't feel like they're the target of the conversation right then.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've talked a little bit about confirmation bias. Can we maybe explore that a little bit further? What is confirmation bias, and how do we, whether or not we can sort of encourage other people to think through it, how we can make sure that we're not too blinded by confirmation bias?
So
we're tackling all the easy subjects today, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I saw happening a lot after the election, and I am 100% guilty of this as well, is that people started going through a huge purge of their friends on Facebook. And I think that one of the risks of that happening, yes, it can be definitely very protective, and it can be a fairly radical act of self-care, that you are setting boundaries with people and with yourself, creating a life that you don't feel like you need to run away from. And at the same time, I think that can help to really reinforce this confirmation bias, this idea that you generally tend to seek out research articles and news articles and other information that back up your position instead of really seeking out information from the other side of the aisle or the other side of the argument. And yeah, I mean, we're all guilty of it. We're all guilty of seeking out information that supports our beliefs.
I think it's really difficult too, because when, as I know you all have talked about before, us good liberals want to understand all perspectives with a lot of nuance. That's really different than thinking that there's a false equivalency for our Mother Jones article in something from Breitbart. But that's not how information works.
Right.
And so I don't think need to put ourselves in a position where our confirmation bias is something that tells us that we need to take in disinformation to feel like we have looked at all sides of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for certain. I hope that I wasn't actually giving that perception. I definitely, there are some positions out there that they're not positions, they're facts, and there are people that choose to believe those facts, and there are people that choose to not believe those facts. And I think that one of the biggest ones that we're encountering right now is climate change. Mm-hmm. And I say right now in terms, this is something we've been dealing with for the past decade plus, but there are proven scientific facts. Pretty much the entire scientific community is in agreement that climate change is real and it's a thing that is happening, and we need to be really conscious about it. And there really is no proof to the contrary, because it's not an opinion. This is something that is generally agreed upon. And I think that when we're talking about those kinds of topics, we are going to run into a huge issue in terms of trying to convince other people of our side, or trying to have reasonable, nuanced discussions with people that disagree on matter of fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on climate change specifically, one of the articles that I looked at going into this was from Vox, which, admittedly is not necessarily a totally middle-of-the-road kind of site, but nonetheless one that I like to look to for evidence that my beliefs are right. But there was an article about how conservatives can't be persuaded on climate change by just more messaging about it. Like, that's just not going to work. And that, in fact, what we should do instead is just stop arguing and just say, nope. You know, like, you know, to stop it, to stop trying to sort of meet them halfway on it. You know, you're not gonna, just changing the words and not saying climate change isn't gonna do it. To try to make some sort of free market message isn't gonna do it. Like, we've been trying this stuff for 20 years, right? And it's not working. So instead, just stake a claim. Just be like, nope, climate change is real. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it with, you know, really strong, vivid language, and it's going to be one of our biggest priorities. We're going to publicize it, and we're going to publicize that you're just not acting on it, and you should be. I don't know. I mean, maybe that is the answer. Maybe there are certain topics on which you can't fight other people's confirmation bias unless all you do is just sort of stake your claim. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that approach and whether it will work. It does seem like nothing we're doing on climate change currently is working.
Well, this gets into that idea that somehow climate change has been co-opted as a political stance, which I know you mentioned backfire effect earlier, Emily, and that's part of that idea that we really reject things that feel like a personal identity attack. And so we've added this factual piece of information about the world and into our identity, and then people can't uncouple that in order to make changes that would actually be more in line with the rest of their identity, because it's so entwined in this one piece that feels really threatened when we start to talk about it.
Yeah, I think something I read, and I've looked at so many things now that I'm not sure what's what, but, you know, I think one of the things I was looking at basically said, if you can start talking about policy, like actual policy and effects of policy and what it means, and sort of show people that they don't know what they're talking about, you know, make them sort of realize that these talking points that they're saying, that they don't actually know what they mean, you know, that can be, and I don't know exactly how you do that, right? You're definitely going to risk just sounding like a smug, overeducated liberal at that point. So
I love the irony, Kelly, that you're saying that in the middle of being like, it was in one article I read that I'm supposed to
you know, it was in the New Yorker, or maybe one of these academic articles I read. No, yeah, of course. And that's a danger. I mean, you know, all four of us on this podcast are highly educated, right? You know, we're gonna sound like smug liberals sometimes, because in fact we are. So how do we approach that?
I mean, I feel like we can look back to instances where at least the majority of public opinion has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the political issue of gay marriage is a really useful thing to think about. Yeah. I remember when I was a teenager, I think it was like 27% approval for making same-sex marriage universal in the United States, and now it's like 60 something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's been a really dramatic shift, and so I know that a lot of people had very personal conversations about that issue, and I think there was a lot of storytelling that happened. A lot of the ads that you saw when people were looking to either reject laws that prohibited same-sex marriage or get people to vote for laws that allowed same-sex marriage, there were a lot of personal stories where people would come on and talk about, you know, I love this person and I want to be with them and there's no earthly reason why I shouldn't, and you know, and I think that was a really important aspect of changing people's minds, is the storytelling. There was a narrative, and it was a narrative that was really relatable. You know, I think probably the majority of people in the world have loved somebody. And I think that was a really relatable storyline. So maybe the whole idea is to talk about things personally, have a personal narrative. Does that sound useful?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think, in fact, that's one of the reasons that climate change is so difficult to tackle. because, it's not that it's not affecting us personally, but it's a lot more difficult to see.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it, but you can see it in ways that people don't connect to climate change.